Everyone in town called me a fool for sinking my life savings into this graveyard of rotting trees. They laughed while I spent weeks digging through the gray, skeletal remains of a failed orchard. But beneath the dead roots, I just uncovered a biological goldmine that's about to change everything. The auctioneer had barely finished saying sold when laughter rolled across the steps of the Briar Glen courthouse. Elijah Mercer stood gripping the deed to Weller Orchard, 42 acres of gray trunks, collapsed fencing, and soil the town called poisoned. At 68, Eli had spent $186,000, nearly every dollar he and his late wife had saved. Someone near the back shouted, "Buy yourself a match, Mercer. Save time burning it down." Eli looked toward the voice, then at the paper in his hand. "Dead trees still cast shade," he said. "You just have to stand in the right place." The laughter grew louder, but Eli folded the deed into his coat pocket and walked down the courthouse steps as if he had purchased the richest farm in Oregon. Clay Voss intercepted him beside the parking lot. Clay was 46, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, and dressed in a navy work jacket meant to make him look like a man who understood mud. "You outbid my company by $6,000, Clay said. "I had a clean plan for that property. Cold storage warehouses, loading docks, maybe 80 jobs." Eli nodded toward the rusted grain silos beyond town. "You've announced 80 jobs 3 times in 5 years. Clay's jaw tightened. "And you just spent your retirement on trees that haven't produced an apple since the last recession." He offered Eli a hand. "I'll give you $200,000 right now. You walk away with a profit and nobody gets hurt." Eli looked at Clay's hand but did not take it. "Nobody is hurt yet," he said. "That's why you're nervous." By sundown, Eli had moved a cot, 2 lanterns, a steel coffee pot, and his old red heeler, Scout, into the orchard's leaning equipment shed. The roof leaked, the electricity failed often, and the nearest bathroom was a cracked sink connected to a rain barrel. His daughter Hannah arrived before dark in a silver SUV and stared at the cot as if it were evidence in a criminal case. "Dad, you sold the south pasture, emptied the savings account, and bought this without telling me." Eli kept sorting tools. "I told you I was going to the auction. You said you were going to watch." He tested the edge of a shovel with his thumb. "I watched myself buy it." Hannah's anger broke into fear. "Mom would have stopped you." Eli looked toward the dead rows outside. "Your mother spent 39 years trying to stop me from quitting." The next morning, Eli began at the north boundary, where the oldest trees stood in crooked lines under tangles of blackberry cane. He did not see a graveyard. He saw graft unions, root flare, drainage patterns, and the faint rise of soil over living wood. The apple tops were dead, but several trunks had sent pale shoots from below the grafts. Something under the ground was still feeding. Eli marked each living rootstock with orange twine. By noon, his shoulders burned, and the town had supplied an audience. 2 pickup trucks slowed on the county road. Men leaned out their windows to ask whether he was digging for buried apples. Eli ignored them until Scout began pawing at a spot near an old hazelnut windbreak. The dog sneezed, whined, and pushed his nose deeper into the dirt. Eli knelt. A smell rose from the soil, earthy, sharp, almost like garlic, rain, and dark chocolate crushed together. He cleared the dirt with his fingers and uncovered something rounder than a stone and softer than a walnut shell. It was the size of a small plum, its skin black-brown and cracked into tiny geometric plates. Where Scout's claw had nicked it, the interior showed thin veins of deep blue running through cream-colored flesh. Eli sat back on his heels. He had dug potatoes, onions, ginseng, wild morels, and one rusted revolver out of Oregon soil, but he had never seen anything like it. Scout tried to eat it. Eli pulled it away and wrapped it in his handkerchief. Beneath the first lump, he found 2 more. All 3 were attached to delicate white threads that disappeared toward the roots. The laughter from the road had stopped. One of the men in the trucks raised his phone and began recording. Eli looked up sharply. "You saw mushrooms," he called. "Ugly ones," the man grinned. "Ugly enough to make you hide them." Eli drove the samples to the County Agricultural Extension office in Asheville, 40 miles away. Dr. Lena Park met him in a lab crowded with seed trays, microscopes, and sealed jars of soil. She was 37, wore her dark hair clipped high behind her head, and listened without interrupting as Eli described the smell, the roots, and the blue marbling. She cut a wafer-thin slice from one sample. The flesh blued more intensely where the blade passed. "It resembles a truffle," she said, "but not any commercial species I know." Eli watched her examine the slice. "Worth anything? That is the least interesting question. It's the first question my bank will ask." Lena smiled despite herself, then leaned closer to the lens. Her smile vanished. "These spores are unusual, reticulated walls, asymmetrical sacs, bacterial colonies along the veins." She looked at Eli. "Do not let anyone dig out there. Do not spray, plow, flood, or sign anything. I need DNA work." By the time Eli returned, the orchard video had reached the diner, feed store, and local Facebook groups. The clip showed Scout digging, Eli wrapping something in cloth, and the caption, "Old man finds gold in dead orchard." At Mabel's diner, conversations quieted when Eli entered. Mabel herself slid a mug of coffee toward him and asked, "So?" Eli added sugar slowly. "So what? So did you find something?" From a booth, a mechanic named Ronnie called, "Probably a diseased turnip." A few people laughed, but not as loudly as before. Clay sat alone near the window, studying Eli over the rim of his cup. "You should have taken my offer," he said. "It's still open." Eli stirred his coffee. "Funny, yesterday the land was worthless." Clay's expression did not change. "Yesterday you were the only man willing to lose money on it. Today you might attract people who know how to make your loss contagious." 2 days later, Lena arrived at the orchard with coolers, sterile tools, soil probes, and a graduate assistant named Mateo Ruiz. Eli led them to the hazelnut windbreak. They mapped every sample location and dug with teaspoons instead of shovels. Beneath 12 trees, they found 31 truffles ranging from marble size to nearly a pound. Some were brown outside, some almost blue-black, and every mature specimen carried the same blue veins. Lena grew quieter with each discovery. At the edge of the windbreak, Mateo uncovered a metal tag wired to an old root collar. Its stamped letters were nearly erased, but Lena cleaned it with alcohol until they could read, BG7 CWRM 2014. Eli stared at the initials. CW had to be Caleb Weller, the orchard's former owner. RM could have belonged to anyone. Still, his throat tightened before his mind admitted why. His late wife's name had been Ruth Mercer. Eli found the hidden notebook that night. The shed had a false bottom beneath rusted pruning blades. Inside were 3 black field journals sealed in freezer bags, a faded photograph, and an envelope marked Eli, only if it fruits. He carried everything to the workbench but could not open the envelope. The photograph showed Ruth standing beside Caleb Weller 11 years earlier, both wearing rubber boots and holding a tray of hazelnut seedlings. Ruth was 59 then, smiling with the fierce, private excitement she wore whenever an experiment worked. Eli remembered that year as the beginning of her illness. He remembered hospital appointments, late phone calls, and Ruth saying she was helping the extension office with one last soil project. He had never asked because he feared another future she might not live to see. Now her handwriting waited inside an envelope the color of old bone. He opened the letter with his pocket knife. Ruth had written that Caleb's orchard was failing from fire blight, debt, and decades of exhausted soil. Standard replanting would take years and money Caleb did not have. Ruth had obtained cultures from a nearly forgotten blue-vein truffle collected in the Cascade foothills in 1986. No one had successfully cultivated it. She and Caleb inoculated hazelnut and oak roots beneath the dying apple rows, hoping the fungus would rebuild soil relationships and eventually produce a crop valuable enough to save the land. "It may take 8 years or 12 or never," Ruth wrote. "If it fruits, Eli, the orchard will look dead before anyone sees what is alive beneath it. You understand that better than most." Her final line made him sit down. "Please do not let the first people who laugh become the first people who own it." The lab results arrived the following afternoon. Lena called Eli while he was standing beneath the windbreak with Ruth's letter folded in his shirt pocket. The fungus was a genetic match to preserved material labeled tuber caeruleum pacificum, known only from 4 wild samples collected decades earlier. No confirmed specimen had been found since 1992. The blue came from symbiotic bacteria producing an intense aroma without turning bitter under heat. "Eli," Lena said, her voice strained with disbelief, "this may be the only cultivated population in existence." He looked across the dead orchard. "Cultivated by Ruth and Caleb, then they did something no one else has done. How much is it worth?" Lena paused. "To chefs, perhaps thousands per pound, to researchers, much more, to the ecosystem we do not know yet." Eli heard engines on the county road. "The town will only hear the first number." Within hours, strangers began arriving. A Portland restaurant owner offered cash for a single truffle. A food broker from Seattle promised national distribution. A man walked the boundary with a camera until Scout chased him away. Eli locked the gate, posted no trespassing signs, and slept with the shed lights on. Hannah returned with groceries and articles about truffle fraud, theft, and elder exploitation. "You cannot handle this alone," she said. Eli bristled. "I handled droughts, auctions, and your teenage years. This is different. People think there are millions under your feet. There might be." Hannah stared at him. "That is not comforting." Eli saw the same fear he had heard in her voice after Ruth died, the fear that he would disappear into work because grief was easier to manage when it had rose. He softened. "Stay for supper," he said. "Then tell me what I'm missing." At the next town council meeting, Clay proposed an emergency land use review for Weller Orchard. The fire marshal raised concerns about dead timber. The public works director mentioned the collapsed irrigation culvert. Clay spoke calmly about traffic, trespassing, and unverified biological claims creating speculative danger. Eli sat in the front row beside Hannah and Lena. Behind them, former mockers argued over truffle taxes, tourism, and whether Eli could sell to outsiders. When public comment opened, Eli walked to the microphone. Last week you wanted the orchard burned. This week you want a share. Murmurs moved through the room. Clay leaned forward. No one is taking your property. Then why review it before the science is finished? Clay's eyes stayed on him. Because a town that has lost a mill, a packing plant, and half its young families cannot afford another man's private gamble to become a public disaster. After the meeting, Clay found Eli in the hallway. The mayor's composure cracked. You think I enjoy being the villain in every room? He asked. I have 200 people calling my office because they believe you found a miracle. Miracles make desperate people stupid. Eli folded his arms. And warehouses make them free. Warehouses make paychecks. Clay stepped closer. My mother invested in a miracle crop when I was 17, black ginseng. The promoter vanished. We lost our farm and she worked nights until her heart gave out. So forgive me if I do not let this town bet its future on a blue mushroom and a dead woman's notebook. Eli's anger cooled without disappearing. Clay was not lying. Grief had roughened the words. I'm not asking the town to bet, Eli said. I'm asking you to keep your hands off the table until I know what I'm holding. The first legitimate buyer arrived 3 days later. August Vale stepped out of a black SUV wearing polished boots that had never touched manure. He owned Vale Gastronomy Group, a network of luxury restaurants, specialty farms, and private food clubs. He brought a chef, lawyer, and testing case. Vale tasted a shaving of blue truffle over warm eggs in Eli's shed and closed his eyes for a full 5 seconds. Pine, cocoa, aged cheese, smoke, and something almost floral, he said. This is not a product, it is a category. He offered Eli $2 million for exclusive rights to the first 5 years of harvests plus improvements to the orchard. Hannah's breath caught. Eli asked, what does exclusive mean? Vale's lawyer answered, no sales, licensing, research access, or propagation outside our company without approval. Lena stiffened. Eli looked at Ruth's photograph on the workbench. Then it means you own the future without owning the dirt. Vale did not argue. He only smiled as though Eli had passed a test. Every rare crop begins with one stubborn owner, he said. The smart ones eventually learn that rarity is expensive to protect. He raised the offer to $3 million and promised Eli a consulting role. Eli asked for a week. After Vale left, Hannah rounded on him. $3 million, Dad. You could secure the farm, help the grandkids, live somewhere with a roof that doesn't drip into your coffee. Eli turned to Lena. What happens if he gets exclusivity? He will likely patent cultivation methods, restrict genetic material, and harvest aggressively before competitors emerge. Hannah said, that is what businesses do. Lena answered, and if this colony is the only one bad season or one chemical mistake could erase it. Eli rubbed his thumb over Ruth's envelope. He had spent years believing Ruth's last unfinished work was simply dying. Now finishing it might mean refusing the money that could protect everyone he loved. They established a controlled harvest the next morning. Lena divided the orchard into research zones, Mateo installed moisture sensors, and Eli trained Scout to indicate scent without digging. The dog learned quickly, sitting beside hidden truffles until rewarded with dried beef. Beneath the oldest hazelnuts, the network was dense and healthy. Beneath the apple rows, it appeared in narrow corridors leading toward buried oak roots. Ruth and Caleb had not planted randomly. Their notes described a living grid designed to move nutrients through exhausted ground. Tests showed rising organic matter, improved moisture retention, and microbial diversity far beyond neighboring fields. The orchard's dead appearance had protected it from cultivation while the underground system matured. The failure was camouflage, Mateo said. Eli shook his head. No, the failure was real. Something living just learned how to use it. Lena looked at him. That may be the entire science of this place. News crews arrived after Lena's university released a cautious statement confirming a rare truffle population. Briar Glen filled with satellite vans, curious tourists, and online speculators. Mabel renamed her mushroom omelet the Blue Fool, though it contained ordinary button mushrooms. The feed store sold shirts reading I laughed at Eli before it was expensive. Eli hated all of it. People who had ignored Ruth's extension work now called her a visionary. Men who mocked his cane offered to guard the property for a percentage. A former classmate left a voicemail suggesting they had once discussed becoming business partners in 1978. Eli switched off his phone and returned to pruning live shoots below the dead grafts. Hannah found him there. You wanted them to see value, she said, not this kind. Value is what people call something right before they try to take it. Hannah sat on an overturned bucket. Then decide what it is before they decide for you. The legal threat arrived in a thick envelope. Weller Orchard's deed included a dormant access covenant granted in 1967 to Briar Glen Development Authority for a service road connecting the highway to an industrial parcel. Clay's company had purchased that parcel 2 years earlier. If activated, the road would cut directly through the North Windbreak, the richest truffle zone. Clay claimed he had not known the exact route when he made his original offer, but survey stakes appeared along the boundary before Eli could challenge him. At the council office, Eli spread Ruth's maps across Clay's desk. Move the road south. Clay pointed to elevation lines. South crosses a floodplain and adds $2 million in bridge work. Then don't build it. The cold storage project has state funding deadlines. Eli leaned over the desk. Those routes took 11 years. Clay stood, and the town has waited 15 years for jobs. Neither man raised his voice. That made the room feel more dangerous. Clay delayed construction 10 days while surveyors reviewed alternatives. Eli knew it was not enough. Vale's lawyer called that afternoon and offered to solve the covenant dispute as part of the exclusive contract. Vale would buy the industrial parcel, reroute the road, and place private security around the orchard. Protection has a price, Vale said over speakerphone. Hannah whispered that the offer was becoming impossible to refuse. Lena warned that Vale's draft gave his company ownership of any microbial strains isolated from the site. Eli asked Vale whether Ruth's name would remain on the research. We can discuss a commemorative plaque, Vale replied. Eli ended the call. Hannah slammed her folder onto the table. You are treating every compromise like betrayal. Some compromises are just theft with polite paperwork, and some are how families survive. Her voice broke. Mom is gone, Dad. You cannot keep making decisions for a person who does not have to live with the consequences. Eli did not answer because part of him believed Hannah was right. After Ruth died, he had kept her boots by the back door, her mug by the sink, and her half-finished garden plan pinned above the refrigerator. He called it remembrance. Hannah called it obeying a ghost. That night, Eli read every page of Ruth's notebooks. Most were scientific: soil acidity, root inoculation rates, bacterial cultures, failures marked in red. Near the end, her handwriting weakened. One entry described a disagreement with Caleb. He wanted to sell future rights to a food company to cover his debts. Ruth refused, arguing that the strain should belong to a regional cooperative if it survived. Eli will say I am trying to save everyone again, she wrote. He may be right, but a discovery that saves only one family is not salvation. It is luck wearing a crown. Eli read the sentence twice, then closed the book. The next morning, Eli invited Clay, Hannah, Lena, Mabel, 2 orchard workers, and the head of the local credit union into the shed. He proposed a cooperative. Weller Orchard would remain privately owned, but future truffle harvests, propagation licenses, and training would be shared through a capped membership regional organization. Local farms could qualify for inoculated seedlings after strict ecological review. Profits would fund research, soil restoration, and jobs. No single buyer would receive exclusivity. You are describing years of regulation and risk, Clay said. I'm describing a crop that cannot be strip-mined. Mabel asked the question everyone avoided. How much would each of us make? Eli replied, nothing until we prove we can harvest without killing it. The credit union president frowned. People don't celebrate patience. Eli looked around the shed. They celebrated my failure fast enough. They can learn a slower habit. Vale responded by making his offer public. News reported Eli had rejected $3 million amid unemployment and budget cuts. Commentators called him principled, senile, selfish, visionary, and financially incompetent, sometimes in the same segment. Protesters appeared at the gate carrying signs that read, "Let the orchard save the town." Hannah discovered her teenage son had been mocked at school for having a millionaire grandpa who wanted everyone poor. Clay denied coordinating the pressure, but he refused to condemn it. Eli began to wonder whether stubbornness and courage felt identical from the inside. Then a package arrived without a return address. Inside was a copy of a 2015 contract signed by Caleb Weller, granting Vale Gastronomy's predecessor an option to purchase all fungal products from the orchard if commercial fruiting ever occurred. The option price was $10,000. Vale's attorney claimed the agreement survived the property sale. Hannah read the contract 3 times. This could destroy everything. Lena photographed every page and sent it to the university's legal office. Eli focused on Caleb's signature. It looked correct, but the witness line carried Ruth's name. It was not hers. Ruth formed the letter R with a narrow loop and never crossed a lowercase t from right to left. Eli had seen her signature on tax returns, birthday cards, permission slips, and hospital forms. This witness signature looked like an imitation drawn by someone who had studied only one example. Vale's lawyer dismissed the objection and scheduled an emergency injunction hearing to stop Eli from harvesting or transferring biological material. Until the court ruled, the truffles would remain in the ground. He doesn't need to win forever, Lena said. He only needs to freeze us until you cannot afford the fight. Eli looked at the rows beyond the shed. Then we find who forged Ruth's name. The only person who might know was Caleb's daughter, Tessa Weller. She had sold Eli the orchard through probate but had left Briar Glen immediately after the auction. Hannah tracked her to a motel outside Salem where she worked night shifts at a distribution center. Eli drove there with Ruth's notebook and the copy of the contract. Tessa opened the motel door only after he said Vale's name. She was 41, thin from exhaustion, with Caleb's pale eyes and none of his patience. "You got the land," she said. "What else do you want?" Eli showed her the forged signature. Tessa's face hardened. "My father signed whatever people put in front of him near the end. Did Vale?" Vale's father, same smile, cheaper suit. She refused to say more until Eli mentioned Ruth. Then anger flashed across her face. "Your wife made my father believe that dirt could forgive debt." He waited for those truffles until waiting was the only thing he did. Tessa let them inside. The room held 2 suitcases and a box of Caleb's papers. She explained that in 2015, August Vale's father had offered Caleb $10,000 for a future option. Caleb refused because Ruth insisted the strain should never be controlled by one company. Weeks later, a contract appeared in the county records anyway. Caleb lacked money to fight it. He became convinced someone at the notary office had helped forge the witness signature. Tessa believed the document was worthless because the truffles never fruited. "Why didn't you disclose this during the sale?" Hannah asked. Tessa laughed bitterly. "Because I was selling a dead orchard for enough money to pay my father's medical bills. I thought the contract was one more ghost." Eli asked whether Caleb kept proof. Tessa pointed to the box. "He kept everything. Proof was the one crop he could always grow." They searched until dawn. Receipts, reports, notices, and letters covered the floor. Near the bottom, Hannah found a cassette tape labeled AV. "Offer, do not erase." Tessa produced an old recorder from her car. On the tape, August Vale's father pressured Caleb to sign. Caleb refused. Another voice, young, smooth, unmistakably August's, suggested they could reconstruct the agreement from earlier drafts and let future lawyers argue over intent. Caleb threatened to report them. The tape ended with a door slamming. It did not prove who forged Ruth's signature, but it proved the Vale family knew there was no completed agreement. Tessa began to cry without making a sound. Dad kept saying the orchard would speak for him one day. Eli handed her Ruth's notebook. It just did. Tessa held the book against her chest. For the first time, Eli understood that the orchard had buried more than truffles. It had buried 2 families' unfinished grief. The injunction hearing drew a crowd large enough to fill the county courtroom. Vale's attorneys argued that Caleb intended to grant exclusivity and that Eli had knowingly interfered with existing rights. Eli's lawyer played the cassette. August Vale remained expressionless until his younger voice came through the speakers. Then he looked down at the table. The judge denied the injunction and referred the contract to the district attorney for fraud investigation. Outside, reporters surrounded Eli, but the true surprise came when Vale approached him alone. "My father believed ownership was the reward for seeing value before others," Vale said. "He died thinking Caleb cheated him." Eli replied, "Your father tried to buy a future for $10,000. Vale's mouth tightened. "And you think sharing it will make people noble?" "No. I think rules will make greed less efficient." Vale studied him for a moment. "You won today, you have not yet survived success." Vale's warning proved accurate. 3 nights after the hearing, Scout began barking at the north windbreak. Eli grabbed a flashlight and saw a figure running between the trees. A pickup engine roared near the service gate. By the time Eli reached the first research plot, the air carried a harsh chemical odor. Blue liquid pooled around the hazelnut roots. Someone had emptied concentrated fungicide into the irrigation intake and opened the valve. Eli shut the line, but his boots were already sinking into contaminated mud. Lena arrived within 40 minutes, followed by the fire department and state environmental officers. She scraped soil into jars while Eli stared at the wilted ground. "How bad?" he asked. "We won't know for days. Tell me now." Lena's eyes shone in the flashlight beam. "This zone may be dead." Behind them, townspeople gathered at the fence. No one laughed. The silence was worse. Suspicion fell immediately on Vale, but security footage from his hotel placed him 90 miles away. Clay became the next target. The survey had given his crews gate access and the fungicide matched chemicals used by his contractor. protesters surrounded City Hall. Someone painted Truffle Killer across Clay's garage. He called Eli before sunrise. I did not do this. Eli answered, then help me find who did. Clay provided employee lists, fuel records, and gate codes. One code had been used at 1:17 a.m. A temporary code assigned to Tessa Weller during the probate inspection. Hannah went pale when she saw the report. Tessa had returned to Briar Glen the day before the poisoning and had not told them. Eli drove to her father's abandoned house with Ruth's notebook beside him and anger pressing hard against his ribs. Tessa was sitting on the kitchen floor of the abandoned house when Eli entered. A mud-stained duffel bag rested beside her. Inside were 3 small truffles, pruning tools, and a glass jar filled with pale root tips. She admitted using the gate code. I came for enough living material to start again somewhere else, she said. My father gave 11 years to that orchard. You paid probate price and became the hero. Eli's anger sharpened. Did you poison the line? Tessa looked offended, then ashamed. I cut the irrigation hose so the sensors would fail while I dug. When water started spilling, I panicked. I found a blue container in the pump shed and poured it into the ditch because I thought it was dye that would show where the leak ran. Eli stared at her. The container had held concentrated fungicide, stored illegally after an old disease treatment. Tessa had not meant to kill the colony, but intention did not change the soil. Tessa handed him her father's lockbox. She had recovered it from beneath a floorboard before entering the orchard. Inside were old bank statements showing that Briar Glen Community Credit Union had financed Caleb's failed replanting and later pressured him to accept Vale's option. The loan officer who signed the notices was Marion Holt, now the credit union president. The pressure campaign had not begun with Vale's public offer. It had begun years earlier when the credit union feared losing everything on Caleb's debt. Marion had attended Eli's cooperative meeting because the bank still held liens against several neighboring farms and against Clay's industrial parcel. If the road project failed and the Truffle plan collapsed, the credit union could face insolvency. Everybody is tied to everybody, Tessa said. That's why no one tells the truth until the ground opens. Eli looked at the poison roots and understood that the town's greed was not a single person. It was fear moving through a network. Eli took Tessa to the fire station and told the truth before rumors could choose a harsher version. Tessa confessed to trespassing, theft, and accidentally releasing the fungicide. She expected Eli to demand the maximum charges. Instead, he asked the sheriff to let the district attorney consider restitution and supervised work if the environmental damage was not permanent. Hannah pulled him aside. She could have destroyed Mom's work. She could have destroyed her father's too. That does not excuse it. No, Eli said. It explains why punishment alone won't repair anything. Tessa overheard him and began crying again, this time openly. She returned the truffles and agreed to help Lena reconstruct Caleb's cultivation records. Clay publicly cleared his crews, condemned the harassment against Tessa, and ordered the illegal chemical storage removed from every city-owned agricultural site. It was the first decision he made that cost him political support and gained Eli's respect. For 6 days, Lena's team tested the contaminated zone. The mature truffles were ruined and feeder roots had died, but deeper mycelium remained active beyond the trench. Ruth and Caleb's grid had contained the damage. The living web had crossed beneath paths, linked separate root clusters, and stored resilience in places no one had mapped. It can recover, Lena said, kneeling beside a microscope in the shed. Eli lowered himself into a chair. Relief did not feel like celebration. It felt like permission to breathe. Lena warned that recovery would require removing soil, replacing root hosts, and sacrificing the next harvest in that zone. Eli agreed before she finished. Hannah watched him sign the restoration plan. You turned down $3 million, got sued, nearly lost the crop, and now you're paying to not harvest it. Eli gave her a tired smile. Your mother always said I learned slowly. Hannah took his hand. She also said you learned for good. The road dispute remained. Clay's funding deadline was 48 hours away, and the alternative route still cost more than the town could afford. At a public meeting in the high school gym, residents divided into 2 angry camps, jobs now or truffles later. Clay stood at center court with maps projected behind him. He admitted the industrial project's financing depended on loans from Marion's credit union. Marion then stepped to the microphone and confirmed what the lockbox records suggested. The institution had overextended itself trying to replace the mill economy. If the project died, dozens of local businesses could lose credit. The confession quieted the room. People had expected villains and found frightened neighbors with balance sheets. Eli asked to speak. We keep choosing between one rescue and another because we build plans where only one thing is allowed to live, he said. Then he placed a new map on the projector, a narrow southern route crossing his least productive acreage, combined with a smaller bridge and a conservation easement around the Truffle network. Clay studied the proposal. Eli would donate 6 acres for the road, but only if the industrial project was redesigned as a food and agricultural processing hub with space reserved for cooperative growers, a soil laboratory, and small local businesses. The town would gain jobs. The orchard would keep its windbreak. Vale would receive no exclusivity, but his restaurants could bid at transparent seasonal auctions like everyone else. Marion's credit union would restructure neighboring farm loans and invest in inoculation trials only after independent review. "You planned all this in 2 days?" Clay asked. Hannah answered from the bleachers, "He planned it in 11 years, he just didn't know Ruth started first." The gym fell quiet. Clay looked at Eli for a long moment, then removed the original road map from the screen. "I can take this to the state," he said. "But if it fails," Eli interrupted, "then we fail in public with honest numbers." Clay nodded. "That would be new." The state approved the modified project, contingent on environmental protections and matching funds. The match came from an unexpected source. August Vale returned to Briar Glen without lawyers and offered $500,000, not for exclusivity, but for a minority, non-controlling membership in the cooperative and first access to public auctions at market price. Eli asked what had changed. Vale looked toward the poisoned windbreak. "You proved the supply can be destroyed by one frightened person in one night. Owning it would not make it safe." He also knew fraud investigators were examining his company's old records, and cooperation would help separate him from his father's conduct. His motives were not pure, but Eli had stopped expecting purity from people who still had to make payroll. The cooperative accepted the investment with voting limits, open books, and no ownership of genetic material. Vale signed every restriction. "You enjoy making money difficult," he told Eli. "Only when easy money is expensive later," Eli replied. Through autumn and winter, crews replaced contaminated soil and planted hazelnuts. Tessa worked beside Mateo every day under the terms of her restitution agreement. She knew Caleb's shorthand, remembered where he had sourced seedlings, and could identify the handmade tools he used for root inoculation. Her knowledge saved months. Hannah managed the cooperative's legal structure and discovered she was better at arguing with investors than she had ever been at worrying about her father. Clay oversaw the processing hub and cut the projected warehouse footprint in half. Marion opened the credit union's loan records to outside auditors and survived the scandal by admitting mistakes before they became indictments. Eli remained in the leaking shed until Hannah and Tessa organized volunteers to repair the roof. When they finished, someone painted a small blue truffle above the door. Eli pretended not to like it and touched the paint whenever no one watched. The next spring, Lena found recovery signs in the poison zone. White mycelial threads had reached the new roots. No truffles would form there for years, but the network had resumed its slow work. In the healthy plots, Scout indicated 47 mature truffles. The cooperative decided to harvest only 12, leaving the rest to reproduce and feed the soil. Chefs from across the country submitted sealed bids. Vale won 4. A New Orleans chef won 2. A tribal culinary program received 1 at cost for research into regional fungi and traditional land stewardship. The remaining 5 were reserved for scientific study and Briar Glen's first public tasting. Some residents complained that selling fewer meant wasting money. Eli invited them to watch the root scans. "A bank account can look full right before it becomes empty," he said. "We are learning to count what remains underground." On tasting day, the courthouse steps filled again. The place that had held laughter now held food tables and locked boxes of blue truffles. Mabel shaved the first one over a skillet, while Lena explained that a piece smaller than a thumbnail could perfume an entire dish. Ronnie, the mechanic who had called Eli's discovery a diseased turnip, stood at the front of the line. "You going to make me apologize before I eat?" he asked. Eli considered it. "After, I want you in a generous mood." Ronnie tasted the eggs and closed his eyes. The crowd waited. "That is deeply annoying," he said. "Why?" Mabel asked. "Because the old man was right." Laughter spread across the steps, but this time Eli laughed too. Mockery had become memory, and memory had lost its teeth. Hannah found Eli at the orchard edge, where Ruth's photograph rested beneath a young oak. "The first auction brought in $280,000, she said. "After restoration, research, wages, and reserves, your share is less than you could have made selling to Vale." Eli watched Scout circle the tree before settling in the grass. "You disappointed? 6 months ago, yes." Hannah leaned against him. "Now I think Mom would have been impossible about this. She would have corrected Lena's labels, criticized the bridge design, and told everyone the soup needed salt." Hannah smiled, then looked at the dead apple trunk standing among new green shoots. Were you really sure when you bought it? Eli took time before answering. No. I knew the roots were alive, I knew the price was low, the rest was grief pretending to be instinct. That is not very inspiring, truth usually needs better marketing. Tessa joined them with Caleb's final notebook page. She had found it folded inside the lockbox lining. Caleb had written it months before his death. If the blue ones ever come, I hope the Mercers are still stubborn enough to protect them. Ruth understood that an orchard is not trees, it is agreements, root to fungus, rain to soil, neighbor to neighbor. Break enough agreements and the land looks dead long before it dies. Tessa handed the page to Eli. For years, she had believed her father's hope had stolen his life. Now she saw that secrecy, debt, and isolation had done more damage than hope itself. Eli asked whether she wanted a permanent job directing nursery operations. Tessa looked toward the new hazelnut rose. As charity, as the only person here who can read Caleb's handwriting without cursing, she laughed. Then I want health insurance. Now you sound like management. 2 years later, the Briar Glen Blue Cooperative supplied inoculated seedlings to 9 farms under strict conservation agreements. Not every planting succeeded, and Eli refused to hide the failures. The agricultural hub employed 63 people, fewer than Clay's original promise but with better wages and room for growth. The soil laboratory carried Ruth Mercer's name. A training greenhouse carried Caleb Weller's. Marion's credit union recovered under new leadership. Vale's restaurants made Blue Truffle famous without controlling it, and his bids remained aggressively high. Clay won re-election by a narrow margin after campaigning on a slogan Eli hated, "Build above what we protect below." Eli attended the victory party only because Mabel threatened to reveal how often he ordered pie on credit. The orchard never returned to what it had been. Most apple trunks remained gray and skeletal, sheltering vines, birds, and beneficial insects. New oaks and hazelnuts grew between them. Visitors sometimes asked why Eli did not clear the dead wood and make the property look successful. He would lead them to the north windbreak, press a hand against a scarred trunk, and explain that appearances had once protected the rarest thing in the county. He did not romanticize decay. Dead branches were removed when dangerous, diseased roots were burned, and mistakes were recorded. But he refused to erase every sign of failure merely to make success easier to photograph. The blue truffles had not grown because the orchard avoided collapse. They had grown because Ruth and Caleb built relationships beneath the collapse, then trusted someone else to continue them. On the anniversary of the auction, Eli returned to the courthouse carrying the original deed. A group of high school agriculture students gathered around him while their teacher described the purchase that everyone had mocked. One student asked how he knew there was treasure underground. Eli unfolded the deed, now soft at the creases. He didn't, Hannah said from behind the group. The students looked surprised. Eli nodded. She's right, I bought land with living roots and no guarantee. Another student asked whether he would do it again. Eli looked across town toward the processing hub, the laboratory, and the orchard beyond them. He thought of Ruth's letter, Caleb's tape, Tessa's mistake, Clay's road, Lena's careful hands, and all the people who had learned that ownership was not the same as stewardship. Not the same way, he said. Next time I'd bring more people before the digging starts. That evening, Eli and Scout walked the rows as the last workers left. Near the repaired irrigation trench, Scout stopped beside a young hazelnut and sat. Eli thought the dog was tired, but Scout stared at the ground and gave one quiet whine. Eli knelt and brushed away the loose soil. A small truffle rested beneath the surface, no larger than a marble. Its skin was dark, its flesh still immature, but a thin blue vein crossed the cut where a stone had nicked it. The first fruit from the restored zone had arrived years earlier than Lena predicted. Eli did not dig it up. He covered it carefully, marked the tree with blue twine, and placed his palm against the earth. He had learned that patience was not passive. It was labor performed without applause, repeated until the hidden work became strong enough to be seen by everyone above. The town had called the orchard dead because nothing valuable could be seen. Eli finally understood that the truffle was not the miracle. The miracle was how much life had survived while everyone was busy laughing.